Mia Su sat slouched in front of her desk, the glow of the computer screen casting a faint light over the cluttered lab. Half-empty coffee cups and open textbooks were scattered around her like a forgotten battlefield, remnants of a long night spent trying to make sense of the impossible. Her eyes were heavy, the kind of tired that felt like it had seeped into her very bones, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to a breakthrough. Her latest project, one she'd poured all her energy into over the last few months, was finally showing signs of life. Well, not life exactly, but something that was almost like it. She stared at the culture dish in front of her, where her genetically modified algae glowed faintly in the dark. The neon green hue flickered erratically, and for a moment, Mia thought it was just the light from the desk lamp reflecting off the glass. But the flickering intensified, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Not again, she muttered, leaning forward. She tapped the side of the dish, then squinted. The algae seemed to move, twisting in unnatural patterns, the glow taking on an almost liquid quality as it shifted shapes. Her heart skipped a beat, a feeling of unease creeping up her spine. She'd been working with genetic modifications for years now, but this was nothing like what she'd ever seen. Was it a freak result of some chemical interaction? Maybe a lab mishap? But she hadn't done anything wrong, had she? As she reached for her notes, intending to run another diagnostic, a sudden shift in the air made her freeze. Something was moving, something else. The algae wriggled in the dish like a living creature, and before Mia could react, a small, translucent shape emerged from the liquid. It was no bigger than a small insect at first, something that resembled a floating jellyfish, but with limbs that stretched out like tentacles, shivering in the air. It wasn't quite solid, but it wasn't quite energy either. It buzzed faintly, a sound that made her blood run cold. Her hand shot back, knocking over her cup of coffee, but she barely noticed. The tiny entity hovered in front of her, its form shifting like a glitch in a video game. Mia tried to swallow, but her mouth was dry. What the hell are you? The creature flickered again, like it was searching for something. And then, it did something that made her gasp in shock. It entered her body. There was no pain, just a sudden, overwhelming sensation of wrongness. A ripple through her mind. She blinked, feeling a brief, sharp tug, like an invisible hand had grasped her skull. The world around her seemed to twist for a moment, as if reality itself had bent just a fraction out of place. Mia gasped for air. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her head. It felt as if her entire body was vibrating, like something foreign was inside her, just under the surface. She clutched her head harder, hoping for relief. But it didn't come. Instead, something else came. A voice. "Welcome, host." The words were cold, unbidden, and echoing in her mind. She stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. Who is this?" she whispered into the empty room, hoping for an answer that made sense. The voice came again, this time with an almost mocking tone. "I am the infiltrator. Your genetic structure is ideal. I will take root in you, and we shall travel across dimensions together." The words felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She tried to speak, to call for help, but her mouth felt dry, her throat closing in on itself. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare, right? But when she looked down at her hands, they didn't feel like her hands anymore. They were the same, but not. Her fingers tingled, her skin felt too tight. A cold sweat broke out on her brow, and her vision blurred. I'm losing it," Mia muttered to herself, trying to focus. She reached for her phone, but it slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. She tried to stand, but her legs were weak, as if the very ground beneath her had shifted. A laugh echoed in her mind. "It's not too late. You can still resist, but why? You are the perfect host. You are the one I've been waiting for." With a flash, Mia was pulled out of her body, or so it felt. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. Her surroundings, her lab, her books, the glass of algae, flickered in and out of existence, replaced by visions. Strange, fragmented glimpses of worlds that were both alien and familiar. She saw people in one world, walking through skies filled with strange constellations, while in another, giant serpentine creatures swam through a black sea, but the parasite didn't stop. It flooded her senses, bombarding her with images of different realities, parallel worlds in the midst of collapse. She saw entire cities eaten away by shadow, civilizations crumbling under the weight of some ancient force. All of them are mine, waiting, the parasite's voice continued. I am the bridge. And you, Mia, are the key. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just an infection. It was part of something far bigger. And it was using her as its way into every world. Then, just as suddenly, everything snapped back into place. The world righted itself. Mia was back in her lab, but her body felt different, foreign, as though it was not entirely her own. The parasite didn't leave her, though. It was inside her now, weaving its way through her very DNA. She staggered to the door, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She needed to get away from it. She needed to figure out how to stop it before it destroyed everything. But where to go? The voice in her head answered before she could even finish her thought. Don't worry, Mia. The answer lies within you. You will travel through worlds to stop me. And when you do, you will become something more than human. More than you can imagine. Mia stumbled into the hallway, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The walls of her apartment, once comforting and familiar, now felt distant, as though she was moving through a dream. Each step she took felt heavier, the parasite inside her shifting and coiling like a living thing, its presence a constant pressure in her mind. She pressed a hand to her temple, trying to push it out, but there was no escaping it. A sudden voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and clear, like a command. You cannot outrun me. Mia froze. She didn't have to look to know the voice wasn't hers. It was the parasite, alive in her mind, aware of her every move. She shuddered, trying to suppress the panic rising in her chest. What had she gotten herself into? A flash of cold fear gripped her. She had always been the practical, scientific type. Her world was filled with equations and experiments, all grounded in the physical. But this? This was something beyond the realm of logic. She had no idea how to fight it. How do you fight something that can slip through dimensions? The parasite's voice returned, softer this time, almost coaxing. You think you can fight me. You think you can stop me. But you are just the beginning. You are nothing more than the key to unlock what I have been waiting for. Mia clenched her fists, trying to ignore it. She couldn't afford to lose her mind. Not now. She needed to focus. She needed to find a way to get rid of this thing before it consumed her, or worse, before it spread to other worlds. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the sudden noise jarring. She pulled it out, instinctively checking it despite the chaos in her mind. It was a message from her colleague, Dr. Rajiv Patel, a fellow bioengineer who worked with her at the university. They had shared countless late-night discussions about the future of genetic research, though he'd never been quite as reckless as Mia when it came to pushing the boundaries. The message was brief. Mia, are you all right? I'm worried about you. Call me when you can. Mia stared at the screen for a long moment, her mind racing. Rajiv didn't know what was happening to her, and there was no way she could explain it in a text. The truth was too impossible. But maybe he could help her. Maybe together they could figure out what was going on. Before she could respond, a sharp pang of dizziness hit her, and she stumbled back against the wall. The world tilted violently, and she gasped for air, clutching the edges of the hallway like it was the only thing holding her together. The parasite was digging deeper into her, and with every passing second, it felt like it was taking more control. It wasn't just in her mind anymore, it was in her body, too, crawling through her veins, altering her very cells. She had to get away. She had to go somewhere safe. Mia didn't hesitate, grabbing her keys from the counter and rushing out the door. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay here. Not with the parasite taking root inside her. Not with it constantly whispering its threats, its promises. She arrived at the university lab nearly an hour later, heart pounding in her chest. The building was empty, save for a few late-night janitors. She made her way to the rear of the complex, where the genetics department had its own research space. It was the perfect place to think, to analyze, and maybe, just maybe, find a solution. She had to believe there was one. Mia's fingers fumbled with the door handle. Her hands were slick with sweat, and her mind felt foggy, like it was slipping away from her. She almost didn't notice the slight distortion in the air until it was too late. It wasn't much, just a shimmer, as if the very fabric of the space around her was warping. But it was enough. The parasite had followed her. Foolish, it said, its voice low and mocking, like a predator stalking its prey. You cannot hide from me, Mia. I am within you. She looked up, eyes wide with terror, but there was nothing in the room. Nothing physical. But the distortion was there, faint and shimmering at the edges of her vision. The air around her seemed to hum, as if reality itself was being bent and twisted. The parasite was manipulating the space, like it was toying with her. She had seen things like this before in her studies, glimpses of theoretical physics, of alternate dimensions bleeding into each other. But she had never seen it happen for real. Not like this. It was happening now. Right in front of her, her breath quickened. She had to find a way to stop it. But how? Before she could think further, the door to the lab creaked open behind her, and a voice called out from the darkness. Mia? Is that you? She spun around, heart leaping into her throat. Rajiv stood there in the doorway, his eyes wide with concern. He must have followed her when she didn't return his message. He was holding his phone in one hand, his other hand reaching out toward her, like he was trying to steady her. Rajiv, Mia gasped, her voice barely a whisper. She could barely form a coherent thought with the parasite inside her, twisting everything. But there was something about Rajiv, his presence, that grounded her. She could trust him. Are you okay? Rajiv stepped forward, looking her up and down. His face was etched with worry. You're not looking so good. You're pale, and your hands. He reached out to take her hand, but Mia jerked back before he could touch her. No, she shouted. Don't. It's not safe. He blinked, taken aback by her outburst. What are you talking about? What's going on, Mia? Her heart pounded as the parasite stirred inside her, pushing her thoughts aside, whispering its commands. Don't tell him. Don't let him know. He will be a threat. Mia struggled to speak, to make Rajiv understand. It's inside me. There's something inside me, Rajiv. It's controlling me. He looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. What? What do you mean? What's happening to you? Her breath hitched, and the parasite's voice grew louder, more insistent. Tell him nothing. He cannot know. You belong to me now. Listen to me, Rajiv. Mia's voice was trembling, the words coming out in fits and starts. I don't know how to stop it. It's a parasite. It's from another dimension, and it's using me to spread across worlds. Rajiv's eyes widened in shock. What? Mia, this sounds insane. I know, she whispered, choking on the words. But it's real. I can feel it, inside me. It's changing me. Before Rajiv could respond, a sharp, unearthly sound echoed through the room, like something tearing through the fabric of space itself. The distortion in the air grew stronger, and the lights flickered. Mia stumbled backward, her head swimming. The parasite was pushing harder now, trying to take full control. Run, Rajiv. Run now. But Mia wasn't sure whether the voice came from her or from the parasite. Rajiv took a step back, his eyes darting around the room in confusion. What the hell is happening here, Mia? Mia grabbed his arm. You need to go. You need to leave. No, he shook his head, refusing to back down. I'm not leaving until I know what's going on. You're not making sense, but I'm not leaving you alone. We'll figure this out. Rajiv, you don't understand. The parasite surged inside her, a violent ripple of energy that made her knees buckle. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. She could feel the parasite trying to overtake her completely, its tendrils slipping deeper into her body, into her mind. No. Mia cried out. Get out of here. You'll die if you stay. But it was too late. As she reached out for him, the world around them began to warp, reality itself twisting and bending like paper caught in a storm. And then, without warning, everything went black. When Mia opened her eyes, everything felt wrong. The air was thick and oppressive, heavy with an unshakable sense of dread. Her body was sore, like she had been dragged through a storm, and the sharp scent of metal and ozone stung her nose. She sat up slowly, her head spinning as she tried to focus. The world around her flickered in and out of focus, as if reality itself had been torn apart and hastily stitched back together. Rajiv was gone. She glanced around the dark room, trying to make sense of her surroundings. She was no longer in the lab. She was somewhere else. Somewhere alien. The walls shimmered, their edges warping in a way that made her stomach churn. And the sky, if it could even be called that, was an eerie shade of purple, swirling with cracks that pulsed like living veins. Above her, jagged spires of metal rose from the ground, reaching toward the sky like the twisted remnants of a long-dead civilization. There was a hum in the air, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from every direction. It was as if the very fabric of this place was alive, shifting and pulsing with unnatural energy. She staggered to her feet, her hands instinctively gripping the cold, smooth surface of a nearby pillar. Her legs were weak, her body trembling from the strain of whatever had just happened. The parasite inside her felt stronger than ever, its presence a constant pressure against her thoughts. It wasn't just in her mind now, it was everywhere, weaving through her very being like a disease, bending her to its will. You're in my world now, the parasite whispered inside her head, its voice sickeningly sweet. Welcome to the first dimension I've taken. Mia's breath caught in her throat as the full weight of the situation hit her. This was it. The parasite had dragged her into another world, a world it had already begun to consume. She could feel it, could sense the echoes of whatever destruction had taken place here. The air was thick with the remnants of something terrible, something that had already been lost. Her pulse quickened as her thoughts spiraled. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let the parasite take control of her body, of this world. She had to find a way out. She had to fight back, but how? What was she even supposed to do? The parasite's voice answered her thoughts as if it had been listening all along. You will find the seed of unification here. And once you do, we will move on to the next world. You will help me spread through them all. Mia shuddered, her stomach turning. She clenched her fists, trying to push back against the parasite's influence. It wasn't easy, every part of her felt like it was being torn in two. But she had to focus. She had to find a way to stop it. With a deep breath, she forced herself to stand tall, ignoring the trembling in her legs. She had no idea how much time she had before the parasite's control grew stronger, but she knew that she couldn't waste another second. She had to find the seed of unification, and fast. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift as she walked, the pulsing hum growing louder with every step. She turned a corner, and what she saw made her blood run cold. A massive, blackened chasm stretched out before her, a deep ravine that seemed to go on forever. The air above it shimmered, and there, suspended in the center of the ravine, was a glowing orb. It hovered in the air, pulsing with an otherworldly light that beckoned her closer. This was it. The seed of unification. The parasite had led her here, and now she could feel its excitement, its hunger, radiating from her very bones. She took a step forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She had no choice. If she didn't destroy it, the parasite would gain even more power, spreading across dimensions like wildfire. She had to stop it. As she drew closer to the orb, her hands shaking, she heard a voice, this time, not from inside her head, but from the distance. Mia. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. She spun around, her eyes widening as she saw Rajiv standing in the distance. He was looking at her with a mixture of confusion and concern, his features pale in the eerie light. He must have followed her here somehow, must have found a way to track her down. What are you doing here? Mia shouted, her voice hoarse. You shouldn't be here. Rajiv shook his head, his face hardening with determination. I'm not leaving you. You need help. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not just going to let you face this alone. Mia opened her mouth to argue, to tell him to leave, but before she could say anything, the parasite surged forward, its presence filling her mind. This is your fault, it hissed. You brought him here. He's a distraction. He will be your downfall. She felt her body tense, the parasite trying to wrest control from her. Her hands clenched into fists, and she could feel the power of the parasite flooding through her, taking over every thought, every action. But she fought it, pushing back with every ounce of strength she had left. She couldn't let it win. Not now. Rajiv took another step forward, his voice firm. Mia, listen to me. We can figure this out. I know you're scared, but I'm here. You don't have to do this alone. Mia's heart wrenched, and for a moment, she almost let go. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that they could fix this. But she couldn't risk it. If Rajiv stayed any longer, the parasite would take him too. It would spread through him, infecting him just like it had infected her. No, she whispered, more to herself than to him. You don't understand. The parasite's laughter echoed in her mind. Don't worry, Mia. He'll understand soon enough. He'll be mine too. Mia's breath hitched as the parasite pushed harder, as if it knew she was at her breaking point. It was tearing at her, demanding control. She stumbled back, shaking her head. She couldn't let it win. She couldn't lose herself. Rajiv reached out, his hand outstretched. Mia, please. And in that moment, Mia made a decision. She didn't know if it was the right one, but she couldn't let Rajiv suffer because of her. She had to protect him, even if it meant losing herself. With one final, desperate cry, she lunged forward, reaching for the orb. The world around her shattered. There was no sound, no sensation, just a jarring feeling of being ripped apart. The parasite's grip on her mind slipped, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Mia was free. She could see everything, the multiple dimensions, the endless worlds, all connected by the threads of fate. And at the center of it all, she saw it. The seed of unification, glowing with power, waiting to consume everything in its path. But Mia didn't let it. With all her strength, she pushed the orb away. She shattered the parasite's hold on her and, with a final surge of will, hurled the seed into the heart of the ravine. The orb exploded in a brilliant burst of light, sending shockwaves through the air. For a moment, everything was still, and then, the world around her began to collapse. Mia woke up in her lab, gasping for air, her heart pounding in her chest. The sounds of the city outside were faint but real. She looked around, dazed and confused. Had it all been a dream? A nightmare? But as she sat up, she felt it, the strange, lingering presence inside her. The parasite wasn't gone. Not completely. But it was weaker. It was fading, its grip loosening as the reality around her solidified. Rajiv was standing at the doorway, his face full of worry, but there was something else there too, relief, maybe even awe. Mia, you did it, he whispered. You stopped it. She nodded slowly, unsure if she had truly won. The parasite was still there, still watching, waiting. But for now, at least, it had been pushed back. For now, Mia had control.